Welcome to Outside Views EU. Today we'll explore an essential and often debated topic, the European Union's approach to human rights. The EU has long portrayed itself as a global leader in promoting and protecting human rights. Its treaties, policies and actions reflect a commitment to fundamental freedoms, equality and the rule of law. But does the EU always lead by example? In this video, we'll examine the EU's human rights framework, its achievements, and the challenges it faces in maintaining its credibility at home and abroad. The EU's commitment to human rights is deeply embedded in its foundation. The Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, adopted in the year 2000, outlines the rights and freedoms guaranteed to all EU citizens. These include civil and political rights like freedom of speech, equality before the law, and protection from discrimination, as well as social and economic rights such as fair working conditions and access to education. The Charter is legally binding and applies to all member states when implementing EU law. The EU's human rights framework is also guided by the European Convention on Human Rights, established by the Council of Europe in 1950. While the EU itself is not a member of the Council of Europe, all its member states are, and they are subject to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. This dual-layered system ensures that human rights remain a cornerstone of European governance. One of the EU's most significant achievements in human rights has been its ability to integrate these values into its enlargement process. Countries seeking EU membership must meet the Copenhagen criteria, which include the stability of institutions guaranteeing democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and respect for minorities. And this requirement has prompted candidate countries to adopt substantial reforms, strengthening human rights protections across Europe. The EU has also taken a proactive role in promoting human rights beyond its borders. Through its trade agreements, foreign aid programs and diplomatic efforts, the EU seeks to influence other nations to uphold human rights standards. For example, the EU's generalized scheme of preferences offers trade benefits to developing countries that adhere to international human rights and labor standards. Additionally, the EU has imposed sanctions on individuals and regimes responsible for human rights abuses, using tools like travel bans and asset freezes. Another important initiative is the EU Action Plan on Human Rights and Democracy, which outlines the Union's priorities for promoting rights globally. And this plan focuses on issues like defending freedom of expression, supporting civil society organizations, and combating gender-based violence. The EU also funds numerous human rights projects worldwide, addressing challenges ranging from forced labor to freedom of the press. Despite these achievements, the EU's human rights approach is not without criticism. One area of contention is the treatment of refugees and migrants. The EU has faced significant backlash over its handling of migrant crises, particularly during the influx of refugees in 2015 and 2016. Reports of inhumane conditions in detention centers, pushbacks at borders, and inconsistent asylum policies have tarnished the EU's reputation as a human rights champion. Member states have often struggled to agree on fair burden sharing, leaving frontline countries like Greece and Italy to bear the brunt of migration pressures. Another challenge lies within the EU's borders. Several member states have been accused of undermining democratic principles and human rights. For example, Hungary and Poland have faced EU scrutiny for restricting judicial independence, curbing media freedom, and targeting LGBTQ+ communities. While the EU has mechanisms to address these issues, such as Article 7 proceedings, critics argue that enforcement has been slow and inconsistent. And this has raised questions about the EU's ability to lead by example when some of its own members fail to uphold shared values. There's also the question of balancing human rights with other priorities such as economic interests and security. For instance, the EU has faced criticism for its arms exports to countries with poor human rights records and for its reliance on energy imports from authoritarian regimes. And these contradictions can undermine the EU's credibility on the global stage. Looking ahead, the EU faces several challenges in maintaining its role as a human rights leader. The rise of populist and nationalist movements within Europe has put pressure on the Union to defend its core values. Externally, the EU must navigate complex relationships with global powers like China and Russia, balancing human rights advocacy with geopolitical and economic considerations. The EU also needs to address emerging issues such as digital rights, artificial intelligence, ethics, and the climate crisis, which increasingly intersect with human rights concerns. Despite these challenges, the EU's commitment to human rights remain a vital aspect of its identity. The Union's efforts have had a tangible impact, from influencing legislative reforms in candidate countries to supporting grassroots human rights organizations worldwide. However, to maintain its credibility, the EU must ensure that its actions align with its principles, both within and beyond its borders. The question of whether the EU always leads by example is a complex one. Its achievements in promoting human rights are undeniable, but so are the gaps and inconsistencies in its approach. Ultimately, the EU's ability to adapt and address these shortcomings will determine whether it can continue to serve as a global model for human rights advocacy. So thank you for joining me today on Outside Views EU again, and if you enjoyed this exploration of the EU's approach to human rights, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below the video. This is Outside Views EU, and I look forward to seeing you next time as we delve into another critical aspect of European Union policy. And the next video is right here in the end screen.